Foundations of Pharaonic Mathematics by R.A. Schwaller Delubicz from the Temple of Man. So this information is among the hardest to effectively articulate for me. It's actually articulated perfectly well in this book by Schwaller Delubicz, but still the language is dense and scientific and philosophical, so bear with me. However, the reason why I'm making this video, and I'm probably going to make a series of these videos on the way the pharaohs used to think about science, math, and the universe, because this is really the foundations of Western civilization, in my opinion. And a great deal of it has been lost. And you can see that this information has been lost by following our modern science, which has gone astray and sort of forgotten to keep in mind the role of nature in us and our ability to perceive nature. So, all right, so here we go. This is the foundations of pharaonic mathematics. Basically, this is the building blocks of the universe. This is called the mystical number. It deals with duality and unity. The number 1 is only definable through the notion of number 2. Multiplicity is what reveals unity to us. That is, our comprehension of things exists only through what we might call the original fractioning into parts and the comparison of these parts to one another, which is but the enumeration of the aspects of unity. For this reason, a definition of the creative function is possible only when we speak in terms of fractioning, and is posing the hypothesis of division of unity, the cosmic source. If the original unity were considered to be composed of parts, the results would then precede the cause. Now, our judgment, our intelligence, that is, our psychological attitude towards this problem is precisely that of the result wanting to judge the cause. So right there he is basically saying, hey, remember when doing science that we ourselves are a part of nature, and thus we ourselves are a part of the variables that make up the experiment that we're doing, or the experiment that we set up. Goethe also talked about this in his studies on light and on gravity and on mass and on the universe, and so did his one of his pupils, Rudolf Steiner. So definitely check out the work of Goethe, as well as the Light Course by Rudolf Steiner, if you want to really objectively think scientifically. Our inability to understand this uncompounded and therefore rationally indivisible unity forces us to use an absurd formula to interpret that which must remain a mysterious phenomena. The passage from 1 to 2, which is called the creative act. We may describe it like this: an absolutely homogeneous milieu, by the action of its own nature, divides itself into 2 heterogeneous states. This phenomenon, functioning similarly, can be observed throughout all living nature, that maintains itself by proliferating in a like manner. The concept of quantity only begins at the point of dualization of what originally could only be quality. Without quantity, a quality without definition. So the way I interpret this is he's talking about oneness and two-ness. So what you have to consider is that number, and the root word of number is numb, because it is numbing to try to conceive of addition and multiplication and division and subtraction in the universe as a natural phenomenon. So this is where number theory is very important, because there are only 9 numbers in existence. And each one of those numbers actually represents a natural principle in the cosmos. We could say a cosmic principle in nature. And this is the part where modern science has kind of forgotten some of that. They don't realize that form is a perception of duality, and formlessness, from which form arrives, is a perception of unity or oneness. So we'll just kind of I'm not going to go through each number and their cosmic principle, but 1 and 2 are the essentials and the easiest ones to get. The number 1 represents infinity and is actually the only real irrational number. The reason why 1 is irrational is because it is not rational for us to conceive of infinity or boundlessness or formlessness. Yet, we do know and sense that unity exists throughout all of nature. And so the principle of oneness or unity are the same. And then everything in form is actually in contrast to formlessness. And so everything in form has been formed from a split. And the split is a division of oneness into two-ness or duality. So all form is based on the way we perceive it. So we can only perceive forms through light and shadow, right? So you can't see anything unless it is casting a shadow, which means the light in which hits a form actually reveals it to us because of the darkness that it creates. So you have to kind of think in inverse terms, or I would say like apophatic terms, reciprocal terms. So there's the first two principles, oneness and two-ness, or unity and duality. We are dealing with a function that is numerating number. This proliferating function, observable first in the plant kingdom, persists in all of nature through the living cell, and must also be found at the basis of everything expressed in numbers. Our science can only work backward from this effect, the result to an eventual cause, by judging this cause from the point of view of the effect. Wisdom, on the contrary, begins with this cause and then works towards the result. That which speculative thought and experience show this cause and its consequences must be sets out of the condition that applied philosophy must obey. So he's kind of saying that we have to deconstruct what we see in order to see how we see, in order to perceive. So we see an object and we get lost in what we see, the visual. But we can perceive by deconstructing what we see how seeing is possible to begin with. So that is a epistemological question. How we know what we know, or how we know what is knowable. We see in pharaonic Egypt, as in almost all revealed religions, that theological philosophy was expressed through symbols in the form of myths or icons, that is, figurative symbols dramatized in a historical guise. We must remain consistent with the spirit behind these teachings. They express knowledge in the mentality of the sages of the time for a specific era and specific revelation, which the West divided and rationalized by exoteric debates of the Eleatic Greeks, was unable to do, as evidenced in the disregard of the myth of the Christic teaching. So, sort of the same thing. He's basically saying that the symbol is not the thing. Like the map is not the actual terrain. But the symbol encodes a whole bunch of meaning that's supposed to guide one to the terrain and through the terrain. But it's important that we don't get lost in the symbol and forget the whole purpose for the symbol in the first place. We search for the theories and explanations in Egypt, forgetting that the sages of those times conveyed all their thinking through their theology in the form of myth, and their hieratic monuments by means of symbols. Similarly, a mathematics designed for profane needs must remain respectfully grounded upon heretical principles of knowledge. To allow deviation from this discipline for practical reasons or to make things easier is to deny its fidelity and connectedness to the esoteric tradition, and in doing so, allow it to perish. The study of the science of numbers in the theological spirit of wise Kemet must conform to the following general conditions. So, right there, before we get into the conditions, he's saying that if you get lost in the symbol and you forget what the symbol is actually symbolizing, it won't be too long before you actually forget or lose access to the knowledge that created the symbol in the first place. This knowledge is passed on, right, by our ancestors to our children. And as they pass away, hopefully this knowledge remains. That's actually why I'm making this video in the first place, because it's important knowledge. I'll sort of go on a little aside here. Mathematics is a language. So obviously a language of symbols known as numbers. Those numbers are natural principles in nature. But what we have to remember is that all of those numbers, or I should say all of math, true math, is geometric, meaning creates a form. And it's not just an ambiguous form, it's a geometric form, meaning it's balanced. So a sphere, a cube, a triangle, a tetrahedron, an octahedron, an icosahedron, all the Platonic solids, those shapes are all balanced. And they do exist in the material world in physical forms like chemistry, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, the human body, so on and so forth. So real mathematicians need to realize that whatever model they create with their language of number, when they draw it out, when they draw that model on 2D paper or make it in the 3D world, it has to be a coherent, balanced, geometric form, or you're actually not speaking mathematics. You're speaking gibberish. Like quite literally, if I was just to babble different tones that are not words, you wouldn't understand any meaning because there would be no meaning. So this is the issue. And it's important to point out that there's a whole mathematical science, I shouldn't even say science, study of irrational numbers. But we already realized, and we already, by reading this first paragraph, that there is only one real irrational number, and that is the number 1, because the number 1 is formless. Hence, there's no rationality to it. It's a transcendent symbol. It means infinity. All other ideas about irrational numbers that you might get in school are somewhat babbling gibberish in the language of math. And the reason why that is a contention is because most mathematicians have forgotten that number itself is actually a principle, a cosmic principle in nature. So they've created a language of quote-unquote irrational numbers and created formulas with them. But you can't map those numbers into any kind of form, to any kind of geometry at all. So it's a loss, if you ask me. Okay, so the study of these science of numbers in the theological spirit of wise Kemet must conform to the following general conditions. There's 4 of them. Number 1, unity must appear as duality while retaining the essential nature of unity. The question then is of an internal function, of the activity of the power immanent in unity. This is the revelation of Heliopolis. Okay. Heliopolis refers to the sun, the city of the sun. The reason why this is the revelation of Heliopolis is because the sun represents everything that we can possibly see or perceive through sight. Because without sunlight or without light, like I said before, there is no visual perception. You need that light and shadow in order to see. And so this first principle of unity must appear as duality while retaining its essential nature of unity is exactly the split between oneness and two-ness. In the principle of duality, we have both light and shadow, so we can see a form. But in unity, we just have perceived expansiveness, infiniteness. So that's what this first principle is that unity and duality must appear together, meaning that duality comes out of unity, meaning that form comes out of formlessness. All right, number 2. That which in relation to the thing is as yet nothing must become something, therefore must become a ternary. And ternary means 3. Since we find this ternary to be the final result of any analysis, this is the revelation of Memphis. So Memphis is another city in Egypt that represents the Trinity, or the ternary. And this is the cosmic principle of number 3. And the way I understand the ternary, or 3, or the Trinity, is we're starting to build form, right? So a single point in space represents almost nothing. But 2 points, you can draw a line between them. And now you have a plane, a flat plane. And then, of course, the 3rd point represents another plane in a perpendicular fashion to the first plane. So you have, say, a cross section and a vertical section connected together. And now you're able to perceive beyond 2 dimensions. So it takes 2 dimensions modeled in order to perceive the 3rd. And it takes 3 dimensions modeled in order to perceive the 4th. So these are epistemological issues, perceptual issues, cognitive issues, awareness issues. So 1 creates 2, 2 creates 3. 3 is represented by the triangle, or the pyramid, or the tetrahedron, which is also a symbol for fire, meaning that it is a principle that self-perpetuating. It motivates itself for the purpose of continuance. Notice that these principles are related not only to number and nature, but the Egyptians put them into their cities. They built spiritual temples that encode mathematical principles so that we would never forget them. This was one of their ways of passing down this information to us. So you have Heliopolis and Memphis. Number 3, that which results from the activity must be 2. That is, it must be able to multiply itself, since 2, or the dual principle, is the principle of multiplication, and everything is sustained by this principle. Thus, it is no longer only a question of pure quality, but also of form, a quantified quality. That's important there. It's a quantified quality. So it's both quality and quantity in one principle or in one form. This is the revelation of Hermopolis, also known as Kimenu. So the way I understand this 3rd principle is it's really about multiplication. So when we look at growth, fecundity, or genesis, that's really all knowledge falls into how do we exist each moment after each moment continually. This is known as genesis, and this is what gestation is about. So this principle of 3 of the Trinity is this self-perpetuating fire, which is our you could say it's our energy, but it's really life itself. It's life energy, life force. And the reason why this is important is because very few people really contemplate how we exist moment by moment, how time is even perceived by us, how we grow cell by cell, chemical by chemical, meal by meal, and breath by breath. moment by moment for a lifetime. And there is a principle according to the pharaohs. And these pharaohs, just so you know, these are pre-dynastic Egypt. This is not Akhenaten and King Tut. This is way before that. This is before the pharaohs were taken over and corrupted, politicized, bought, infiltrated. So this is the early pharaonic thinking, which was a much more spiritual civilization than later Egypt. Number 4, the fourth principle. Consequently, the result must be at the same time a revelation of that which is both arithmetic and quantitative, and a quantitative relationship of things to each other, and geometric, the function of growth of the thing in itself. This is the Theban revelation. So there's the last city, Thebes, or Theban. Okay, so this one's a little hard for me to understand, but the way I think I understand it is once you're able to perceive the fire, the ternary, then you can move on to the fourth one, which is Quadrivium, how the number 4 actually wraps things up nicely in a perfect square. So a perfectly balanced, all right angles symbol of, or a symbol that encodes quality, quantity, growth, and then perpetual growth. So it says it's both arithmetic and quantitative relationship of things to each other. So it's both math, which is quantity, but it's also the relationship of the numbers to other numbers. So it's the relationship between 4-ness, 3-ness, 2-ness, and of course 1-ness. And that is all represented by the square. These affirmations are functional. They have a vital universal character. Their application or expression through numbers encourages us to regard them as denominators of active powers, not as arithmetic values. Proportions proceed from them, but are not causal. Okay, this is a very hard part to get. The abstract part is that even though the symbols of each number are cosmic principles, he's saying that they express the original cause, but they are not causes in themselves. I'll just leave that like that, because I don't know how to go further into that. It is thus that the golden number or sacred number, designed by the symbol phi to the fourth power, is to be regarded as a creative or separating power. It is the power that provokes the scission or the split, and consequently it is not derived arithmetically from the root of 5, because the power 5 is not a cause but a result of the function of phi. Okay, so ultimately all of this mathematical pharaonic thought is actually revolves around the transcendental proportion, the transcendental symbol known as phi. And I've talked a lot about phi before, but it goes so much deeper than just the symbol or just the spiral or the vortex cone, which is the pattern in which we see almost everything in nature growing by. So we're going to go deeper into phi, and this is why it's important. Is phi is the most common proportion expressed in nature. And this is why the Egyptians encoded it into their architecture and into their artwork, and I mean all the way down to the size and shape of rooms, and the objects in them were proportioned, at least in the temples, were proportioned with the ratio of phi, because they knew that not only is that knowledge encoded in the building and hopefully passed on to the next generation, but they know that when you step into that room, it actually has a effect on the person or being that's in that room. It has the ability to move your assemblage point, to shift your perception into a harmonic, a natural mathematic harmonic. So it's actually a man-made natural harmonic. And nature makes these harmonics constantly, all the time, but this is man discovering the harmonic and then building it into a sacred space, and then putting himself in that sacred space in order to move into a sacred awareness or a sacred self-consciousness. So ponder that. Think about that. It's not only brilliant, but it's beautiful. It's an aesthetic of beauty. And when reality drifts away and we grasp at whatever the meaning of meaning is, the one thing that can bring us back, even if we don't know what we know, is beauty. And so the human consciousness is not only tuned to perceive and access beauty, but it's tuned to be beauty itself, if we intend it, if we balance ourselves enough. Okay, so that's that for now, but I'm going to go further on into the mathematics of the pharaonic thinking, and hopefully you'll join me.